Welcome again. We had a really great panel with Salmin, and we are now starting into our second panel with other great two speakers who already had an exchange yesterday by the dinner. And let's see if we have the results of that exchange today on the panel. It's on multinational, on feminist knowledge transfer and multinational cooperation. And let me introduce to you first our moderator, Iris. Iris has the background in molecular biology, and she's now a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford University School of Medicine. And when she was asked about her vision for the future of her research, she said, I want to forecast which lung cancer patients will respond to immunotherapy. I want this because long-term benefit is only seen in 1 out of 5 patients, while all are burdened with side effects and the costs for society are high. I can do this because I'm part of a team that combines extensive laboratory skills with state-of-the-art bioinformatics. So, meet Iris.
Thank you. Okay, I'm very, very excited. And we're going to shift away a little bit from academia, I think, where we all feel very comfortable, to multinational industries. So I'm very excited to introduce to you our panel. We have Dr. Julia Schüller and Dr. Carri Duncan. Julia obtained her PhD in chemical engineering from the Technical University in Dortmund and is currently vice president of chemical research at BASF. We just talked about what that means, and I will not repeat that, but Dr. Carri Duncan is born and raised in Detroit in the US and obtained her PhD in neuroscience from the ETH in Zurich, and afterwards established herself in the financial industry. Currently a managing partner at Karaktero and responsible for capital market advisory, focusing on healthcare and technology. So I'm very excited, very impressive, so please join me.
Thank you.
So there's one opening question that I was asked to ask, so we will start off with that. And I understood, Dr. Duncan, that you also would like to show some slides. So I propose we start with the kind of opening question and a very short answer maybe, and then we will move to that. So the first question is, what is the person or leader from global industry who embodies feminist values according to you?
So first of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for the question. I just spoke about this person yesterday. We have someone here who's from Pakistan, sitting right here in the second row. And I told her about a very passionate woman from Pakistan who I got to know several years ago. She was leading efforts for children in Pakistan in health and for poor mothers. And I was working for Bill and Melinda Gates at the time. They wanted to strengthen their impact in health, and they were looking for the best and the brightest, and they were scouring the globe. So her name is Anita Zaidi, and she didn't want to leave Pakistan despite the very attractive offer from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Having spoken to her about some of the initiatives that she did, and her love for her country and for children really had an impact on me as a person. So that's the person I think of when I think about inspiration and passion.
How about you, Julia?
Yeah, so maybe I can say that we had, thank God, a bit of a preparation. So that question was already sent to me yesterday. And I want to share something with you, because on that question, I'm already a failure, because in the immediate moment, nobody came to my mind. And then I was thinking, wow, I think somehow this is telling me something. So I found the fact interesting, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. And even when I thought about it, I was like more thinking, or there were more people of my life came to my mind that made like little things, little changes in certain moments, took a certain decision where I thought of, but to be honest, I couldn't name somebody. So maybe this is saying something about me or about our industry. I don't know.
No, I felt the same way. It was through having discussions yesterday that, in fact, these started to surface. We're not necessarily primed to have such female leaders in our head and kind of hero worship them as we do with so many men. But when we have these discussions, I think that's why we should speak with one another, because that's when these things start to surface.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think we will come back to the role models later, and we will also dive a little bit deeper into both of you and your career and your pathway. But yeah, I'm very curious what you wanted to share with us. You said you prepared some slides, so maybe you want to just kick off with that, and then we can go from that.
Sure. So despite my molecular biology background, I moved into the capital market. So just a little blurb on what that means. The capital markets in particular, they are instruments, like any markets where trades happen. It could be stocks, it could be bonds, but it's to invest in or grow a company. So that's where I'm active. I'm one of those gatekeepers, one of the thousands of gatekeepers in this industry. So now that we have that word out of the way, I want to dispel some myths. Because when you think of a stock exchange and you think about traders and investment bankers, what comes to your mind? Anyone?
Men.
Men? And how do they look?
Suits, yeah. And rushing.
And rushing, yeah. A lot of times we don't see the women behind the scenes. And the banks, these financial institutions, they see the women for this reason. Women are actually outperforming men in the capital markets. So if you look at probably one of the toughest areas to run money or to manage money, it's hedge funds. So maybe some of you have heard of mutual funds. All of us here, you can pay a few bucks and get into a mutual fund. Hedge funds are only for professional investors, high net worth individuals. And with that comes an extra layer of exotic planning and structuring the portfolio. Women are really, really good at this. And so I'm not going to spew all of these facts here, but the 48 versus 37% of male funds, that outperformance you see is very clear there. Small thing here, let's skip to the third bullet. Men and women with the return surpassing men by 0.4%. So that sounds super small, but why are these things important? It's because we're talking about trillion-dollar industries. So we're talking about billions of monetized gains that women are bringing to a sector where all of us here think of men, and that's a mistake. It doesn't attract enough women, but women are definitely needed in the sector, not just because of the monetary gains that come on top, but because we need more balance in the industry and less testosterone. So that's what I want to say, a little bit about the performance. And it goes beyond the financial piece where women are the fund managers or the investment bankers. If you look at the governance level, like who's looking at these companies and making sure they're doing the right thing, again, these companies are outperforming when you have these female board directors. And then you have publicly traded companies with diversity in general outperforming. So all of these things, although they're not said loudly, they're true. And the people and the men who are in the know do have women running these big hedge funds, which I think is important for you all to know. This is the appendix, so I'm not going to go through all of this different data here. But that's all I wanted to share with you today, some of the numbers behind the industry that I'm in.
I think that gives us a very good background and something I definitely didn't know, and I think maybe, if I can speak for us, I think not all of us are in this sector, so I think this is very good to know. I'm wondering, for both of you, you both come from academia, you did a PhD and you then decide to move into industry, very different industries, but still. So can you explain a little bit about what your motivation was, how this transition was, what you learned along the way, or what are the key differences between your academic part of your career and then your switch? Maybe Julia, you want to start?
Yeah, so as you already mentioned, I studied chemical engineering, and I also did my PhD in chemical engineering. And the PhD was also together with a company, so it was like a Drittmittelprojekt, and it was as a chemical engineer, at least in Germany or the German academia, it's quite natural to go to the industry. So our whole education and the whole studies are already preparing us to go. So for us, for chemical engineers, it's more the question why staying in academia. And for example, we also talked yesterday about the postdoc. So even in Germany, a postdoc is not very common or was at that time for chemical engineers. So for me, it was maybe the more natural step going to industry than staying in academia. But of course, I asked myself the question, and I mean, I'm very honest here. I had the feeling that I'm good at what I'm doing scientific-wise, but I had the feeling that there are others that are better when it comes to the science work and to deep knowledge and to expertise, and that I have maybe other things to offer that I would like to bring in an industry context. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I wanted to be a scientist since I was 7, and it was very, very difficult for me to change out of that academic path. My father was extremely disappointed, so there's also some external pressure. But besides that, it became clear to me after I started to get to know the machinery from the inside that academia is just really hard for women like myself. I wanted to have a family, and for a tenure track, it's just not clear until quite late in the reproduction cycle whether you get that track or not. And I didn't want to gamble that because it was something that I really cared about. The autonomy of being able to be excellent and being able to progress in the career of your choice was extremely important to me. So I actually went into investment banking for lifestyle reasons, which is not something you'd hear a lot about. I wanted to have a family. I just found at that time, I hope things have changed since then, but at that time, in the early 2000s, I didn't see a viable route for that, at least not ending in an institution where I would have motivated graduate students and a budget, et cetera. It's just, you just don't know what you get having invested for so long. So I began to think about where my skills were transferable. So before I went to the ETH, I lived in Manhattan and just thought, okay, well, why don't I try something completely different? I published my first paper when I was 19. I've been a science nerd since I was a kid, and I was feeling a little bit very narrow in this big city. Why not try something like finance? And I talked to some folks and found out that there were people in banks like myself, equity analysts, and these are folks who are the buy, sell, hold people. So you look at a company and you know your industry, in my case, biomedical sciences, and you can say whether a drug makes it or not. You go to conferences, you meet with scientists and medical doctors. So that was all a lot of fun. And then I went to do my PhD, and I loved it. It worked out really well, and it spawned a lot of new projects. And there was a kind of a promising looking career, but no one ever knows on the tenure side. And so that was, I would say, my love for science is what actually pushed me out of it, funny enough.
So maybe, can you elaborate a little bit more on, because I find it super fascinating that you then go to a completely different industry. Like, there must be a phase where you were like, what am I doing? Like, how am I ending up in between?
No, I loved it because then in consultancies and financial services, you have so much intellectual autonomy. So I could choose, oh, this biotech company is working on cancer. I go to ASCO, the conference for oncology, the big one in Chicago this year. And then you start to dig into the data. Or when a company does a press release and they say, our drug is in phase 1, and then you look it up in clinicaltrials.gov, and you start to look at the statistics, and you're like, this is not powered enough. So all of the stuff that we use as tools in academia, you get to go out into the real world and actually make a difference in whether companies move forward or not, and get drugs on the market for real purposes. And there are parts of my project during my PhD where I was looking doing biochemistry to see if a molecule sat in this orientation or in this orientation. It took months. And we need that basic research, but I could see the immediate impact on drug development from what I and my colleagues were saying about these particular companies.
Very cool. I think it's something that you both have, right? This impact, that is something I hear that comes back. So maybe shifting topics a little bit. So to be honest, I've never so far in my career, which is not so far yet, experienced this kind of inequality or that being a female impacted me in the things I did. So I'm just curious when you both realized, because I mean, you're sitting here today for us, when did you realize this for yourself, and when did it become apparent for the females around you that this was actually an issue, because both of you have risen to the ranks in your specific fields. So I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Should I start? Okay. So maybe I already shared that with a few of you yesterday. So when I was at school, university, and still PhD, I was always, or very often, in a minority situation. So there were a lot of men. And especially as an engineer, I think this is kind of like normal in almost all the countries. And when I started at the company and I got in touch with all these like female networks and all the stuff, I was a bit like, okay, do I really need this? I mean, come on, I know so many men, I have so many colleagues, I know how to deal with that, So of course I was following all that, but I didn't know, I didn't want to like problematize, I don't know if the word even exists, but make it a problem that I've never had. But then there were really like very small moments. For example, you all know that you are sitting in a meeting room, there are a lot of male colleagues, you are there's a discussion on whatever, and you're saying something, and everybody's like, huh? And the discussion goes on. 4 minutes later, somebody else says exactly the same thing, and everybody's like, oh wow, that's a good idea. And you're like, did I just think it? Maybe I just didn't say it. And you ask your neighbor, like, did I just say it 5 minutes ago? And you say, yeah, well, maybe you pointed it other way. And I was like, come on. And I mean, I know now that this is a textbook phenomenon, so this is super normal. But when it happens the first times to you, you think like, okay, maybe something's wrong with my language, or maybe I couldn't make myself clear, which is new to me, because before I was at conferences and I was pretty clear, but okay. And then I started with these small things to understand, okay, at least in organizations or some organizations, there is a difference in the way you are seen, in the way the same behavior is taken. And yeah, so that was, and also with the quota thing, when I started, I was like, who needs that? But now I'm also like, okay, it just never happens if you don't have it, at least until you come to a moment where certain habits and certain things become like natural or normal to everybody, and then maybe you hopefully don't need it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw this quite late as well, and I would like us to think about it less as a glass ceiling and more as quicksand, because women have to tread, to not sink. It's so much harder. That floor is not as secure, and I know. So I worked in the chairman's circle at Bayer, this pharma agro company, and I was the only female, only person of color under 50, under 40, actually. Also, my role in those circles was to talk about how the capital market sees our company and what we can do, defensive and offensive. But there were moments where I would look around the room and I just thought, oh my goodness, I'm really, I want to pull more women in here. And I think that's what we can all do, bring more women to the table. More women to the table, but also that we take our seats at the table. And so that's where I think a lot of it becomes more nuanced. Not that there's particularly overt discrimination. Yes, I've had that. You cannot imagine, or you don't want to imagine, what anyone sees in an investment bank. It's really sometimes like a locker room. But then there are certain personalities that are attracted by that lifestyle and compensation. But as with anything, you bring your passion and your resilience, and that usually helps to take care of a lot of the shenanigans that you see going on around you. And then certainly allies, bringing more women around so that you're not the only one, if possible.
So you both say like it's either subtle or maybe even less subtle. Do you have any kind of concrete recommendations, or what is, in your opinion, that we as women can be more outspoken about to realize that this is happening, or to prevent that this is happening?
Yeah, I think men, the way they kind of kid around with each other is just different. I don't know anyone who's a nice girl who made it. You have to care more about yourself and your mission and your community than anything else. There's a certain kind of resilience and Teflon that you have to have, probably in any industry. I see it in academia too. You also have this kind of patriarchal structure that can sometimes get a bit ugly. So that would be my advice.
What helps me sometimes, or what helped me before, is so at least for me, maybe that resonates with you. When something happens to me that is weird or where I think serious, of course I look for the mistake in myself. Oh, what did I do wrong? What did I not explain it right? Whatever. For me, it sometimes helps to think that it didn't happen to me, but for example, my best friend or my sister or somebody I'm close to that has happened to. And then I feel that I suddenly get different emotions about it, that I think, how can this be? And this person, and there's a certain energy in it. I don't want to say that you should be angry or something, but as you said, I think that can, so at least me, that makes sometimes a bit more tough when I'm thinking I'm representing or fighting for somebody who's very close to me. Actually, I should be close to me, but I think there are so many internal things that kick in when you are treated in a certain way that sometimes that helps to get a bit away from that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, can you give us some more examples about how you create this, how do you nurture and create this environment where the women that come behind you can flourish? I think you already gave a great example, but are there other things you're doing for the people that come behind you?
So, for example, I have in my organization, I have a shared leadership position. So I had the chance when I had my first leadership position to share it with an experienced colleague. And my boss, female boss at that time, she had a hard time in not a hard time, but it was not so normal. So she had to implement that in the organization. And I shared that with a colleague. And of course, there were 1,000 things like, oh, and if this goes wrong, and this and that, and so many. But in the end, it was super good. Everybody, so the employees, everybody loved it. And so we thought we stick to it. And in my organization now, there are 2 mothers, actually. They are super leaders, but they want to work part-time. And they share a leadership position, for example. And I think these things should be so normal that nobody... So now I mention it again because I like it, but this should be super normal, these kind of things.
It's super cool, and I've never heard this, for example, in academia, where I think most of us are now still in or from that. This is an option, but this, to me at least, sounds great that people have the choice to make that decision.
Yeah, so maybe to add on that, so I also think in the corporate environments, a lot has changed. So when I looked it up, so I started in 2008 at BASF, and I still looked the numbers up. In 2013, we had in leadership positions in research, which is at BASF around 3,600 people. So overall, in leadership positions in 2013, we had like 14% female, and now it's 30%. And I'm super proud because in the senior executive management in research we have more than 50 now, and this more than 50 I think is really cool because this is not. We had the argument like, yeah, but we want to have the best, and the 50 or more than 50 is still not the amount that comes overall from the university. So we are exceeding here, and I think this is really good. But this is, as you said, we have this, what I mentioned, women in research. We have these learning networks like peer coaching groups. So we are doing a lot. And what was said, quota and everything, you actively have to push it, I think. And as soon as you are in a position where you have any influence on that, as you said, I think
Exactly.
you really have to fight for it. And to what you did is, I think, a very good example. And to also let others grow, because I think it's fun, it's the right thing, and it's our responsibility, I think.
Personally, because you asked what else we're doing, I mentor and invest in female CEOs in healthcare and in technology. So these are areas that are not generally backed by male VCs, particularly when it comes to women's health. I mean, you name a certain body part and the venture capitalists are giggling. And what that means is healthcare disparity for women. So I'm very keen on getting to know and investing in female founders here, particularly in Europe, where the capital gap is very high.
Yeah, okay, I want to shift gears a little bit to the multinational part of this panel. Because I think we had a very great example yesterday when some of us were talking about an email and interpreting it completely different with the same word. So maybe Julia, for you first, you're working in a global company, working in 91 countries, I believe, over all different continents. So how do you deal as a leader with different people over the world that work in your company, but maybe also cultural differences in that regard, or consumer expectations that are different in different areas of the world? Is that something you're actively thinking about or working on, and how, what is your strategy about that?
Yeah, I think for us, this is super important because you always have to balance. On the one hand, I think when you want to understand local markets or buy at local vendors or suppliers, or you want to sell your stuff locally, you have to have local people who have the connections, who speak the language, who are close to them. So you really need people on the spot. But on the other hand, what you also need, I think, in a global company to excel and to get most of all the experience is to have exchange. So that means technically you also, I think, so we work with delegations, so sending people to other countries for a while. Of course, they have a role, a position there, but of course, part of it is also their development in understanding another culture or understanding in general, sometimes even the own culture better. So I think when you are in a different country, you see your own culture with different eyes. And the most important thing is exchange changes, like, for example, for trainings, or when you have like technology meetings, for example, we sometimes have the same production plant or same technology in like 7 countries, and they are running sometimes differently. So it's the same technology, the same plant. Some are really without problems, others have issues, and to exchange that, I mean, you have a nice topic to talk about, right? Like science, technology is something we can all relate to, but you also get to know each other and understand each other. And of course, we have trainings for that as well, because I learned that, for example, when you address, so Germans have a very blunt way, for example, of addressing like issues or problems or maybe even mistakes. And of course, we learn that also when we work in a global environment, that maybe you should address things differently somewhere else, otherwise you won't get nowhere. So I think exchange is a very important thing, and we kept that during COVID, which was a hard time, I think. But still, I have to say that also the physical contact, so like meeting people, is also very important for that. But I think science and technology is a super vehicle to get in touch and to discuss and to learn from each other. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. And Carri, I'm very curious. It's a personal question, but I think it's a very interesting one for many of us, because you have lived in 7 different countries, moved yourself, different cultures, different habits, establishing yourself. Do you, could you elaborate on that, and can you give us some insight in tips and tricks, because I think a lot of us are dealing with these situations.
Okay, so 5 countries and different indeed. I mean, for myself, this is a personal question. Moving from Manhattan to Zurich was definitely a culture shock. One, because I thought Switzerland was a smaller, cuter Germany. That was a mistake. So I came in blazing fast as an ignorant American. And then the second thing is I didn't understand the vacation culture here. And so, as many of you know, the United States was built on very puritanical roots. And so working is like being holy, nearly. It's a part of your character. If you're not working, then somehow something's wrong with your character. And so when people were taking coffee breaks and taking all of their vacation, I mean, I was really surprised. I asked, how much of your vacation do you take? And people said, all of it. I was really shocked. So I had to very quickly begin to understand, okay, the people, obviously they look happy, they're healthy, they're educated, you know, so this must be something that's working here. And so I began to engage into it myself, and I'm proud to say that I take all of my vacation every single year. So I think it's just looking at the other side, the places where you scratch your head and you have a question mark, just dive right into it.
Maybe to add on that, because that resonates with me, I think it's not only about culture, it's about everything. When you're coming to a new company or you come to other people's houses, something, I mean, we have a tendency, which is normal, to judge on it. Do we like it? We don't like it. This is weird, or this is. But I think when you retain this idea of, wow, this works as well. I mean, as you said, the people are healthy, they are working, they are happy. So this is just another way of doing something. And I think keeping that, so at least I put that for me as a goal, keeping this interesting idea instead of the quick, like, oh, that's okay. So I think it helps.
Yeah, and even now, I tell my American friends, and they say, I haven't had vacation in 15 years. And I'm like, is that healthy? So yeah, now I do the opposite. Yeah.
That's funny. And I completely recognize that moving from Europe to the US, this was I would say shock for me the other way around. But okay.
Did people think you were lazy or what?
Yeah, like I was like, it was such a nice day, and it was like, people were asking me like, oh, you want to join serving? And I was like, yeah, sounds good. So I said to my colleagues like, okay, bye, I'm gone for the afternoon, look at the weather. And people were like, what are you doing? Oh, okay. But they're used to it now, yeah. Okay, so I've asked a lot of questions, and I have many more, but I just want to open up to the audience, because I think there will be also some questions.
Not a question, but a remark, if I may.
Sure.
Because I have not spoken today so far. I found interesting that in Berlin a couple of years ago, my personal business coach, she's a feminist, a white feminist, and she and the University of Berlin, they made a program to train women who were aspiring to become chairs and boards in business, but also in administration and big institutions. And I'm saying that because I became this leader for Amnesty Germany without knowing what was expecting me there in terms of leadership concepts, models, strategies, power strategies, and so on. So you feel quite alone. You need allies, and I think this. I think it's really good if we can establish the idea of asking for more training so that you can become an executive director of whatever, or you can become a board chair or becoming part of the board and having a seat at the decision-making tables, but being equipped and knowing, not by learning by doing like me, but from learning in a course, in a training course for 1-2 years, the how to do it. What are the strategies? What are male strategies? What are power strategies? How can you respond to that, and keeping your seat so that it does not become a seat which throws you out of the system. I think this kind of leadership skills, they are not natural. You can learn it, and you should learn it. And there should be opportunities also where you can learn it.
Yeah, and again, don't be shy, because in our company we also there was a training offer I took, and it was for female only, so leadership training for females, and it was called Wenn Führung rockt. So the name was a bit but okay. And again, it kicked in that I was like, okay, do I really need something like special? I could do a normal one, but it was brilliant because all the things and all these textbook little things were presented there, and you were like, I'm not alone. This is just a structural thing, and there are measures measures and ways to cope with it. So it's like also like science. I mean, you can just you observe something and you can do something against it. It's
So maybe I have a question regarding. Thanks. Because you literally prove by numbers that women in that field outperform men, and I have a lot of friends in New York working on funds, and so I just send them. So thanks for this, and they'll be like, But I was wondering, like in a completely different field, do you think what could be the reason, apart from quota, to hire more women, because that is proven and nobody can say anything. Then they would say, because men are more resistant, they don't get pregnant or so on. So there's always a but, I would say. But, I mean, how to prove that without numbers? Because in the humanities, where there's no measurements or papers published, or there's literally no, way, number-wise, to prove that a woman can, outperform a man. How to bring that person in?
Well, the kind of proof is behind what's behind those numbers. You look at these numbers and you say, okay, we see that men are performing worse under pressure. We see when the markets are tanking and when you really need skill, not just when everything's going up and any monkey can throw a dart at a stock table and perform, but when you really need skill, you see women outperforming. That argument can be translated across industries. That emotional intelligence and that power that we bring to the table of passion and getting things done when they need to be done and taking the I out of the equation, I think it's not only for finance, definitely not. And even if you can't measure it in the humanities, you have lots of examples where men, that was a Goldman Sachs study, where men looked at this stuff to say why we don't have women, and again could not show why that's the case.
Maybe I would like to confirm that, because what I think is, the world is getting more complicated. We have all the transition also of our industries towards sustainability, and I think it's getting more and more like dilemma or trilemma. How many lemma? I don't know what the next one is. But you want to grow, but you want to be sustainable. You want to please your investors, but also your employees. You want to have a cheap operation, but it should of course be safe for everybody. So there are so many complicated things. And then think of, there's a negative side of it, but think of all this mental load thing. We as women, this is also black and white, stereotype thing, but I want to say that we are used, or pretty much used, to tackle many things at the same time, to have many balls at the same time in the air, to take decisions when it's not pretty clear what is the right one. So I think there's a lot of potential, and you see that, as you said, for example, I see that also in operating a production plant, for example. There sometimes you have to make a quick decision, you don't have all the information at hand, and I also see that females are really, really good at that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Carri, you already said that you are dealing with some very tough men in a very tough environment in finance. And I was also asking right now myself, are there anything we can learn from them in terms of, putting yourself out and getting to your goal on purpose? And on the other side, are there things you would say, never do that? Even if it's successful, even if it will bring you forward, never do that, and why?
Yes and yes. So I would say never in an attempt to try to show someone who you think does not respect you, bow down to that person. That's the worst mistake you can make, because then they lose respect for you and then you lose your voice. And if you have no voice, you never get that seat. So, and then as far as the positive strategy, what men do really well, where we could use some work, is when something happens, getting over it very quickly. Mm-hmm. So just move on. When the guys did the stupid joke with the calendar that I mentioned earlier, I wasn't upset about it that afternoon. I laughed at the person, and then move on. So then I would go on road shows with these guys. We fly over to New York and be from 6 a.m. To 6 p.m. and from meeting to meeting in the back of a car and working together and thinking about strategies. And if you hold a grudge, or if you feel like if you're too, let's call it too self-aware, I think that can get in your way. And that's with anything. It's beyond the financial industry.
What do you mean with self-aware?
Self-aware in a way that when things go wrong in your head, what did I do wrong? Did I look silly? Yeah, okay, yeah. You know what? I looked really stupid, but here's what we have to do this afternoon. Just to move on. Let the train leave the station.
We were also talking about the triggers. When people trigger certain emotions in ourselves. How was your experience with that? I mean, you are on very high leadership positions, both of you. How do you deal with that?
So but this is maybe my personality. I'm trying to do. That's why I like your the joke with the calendar so much. I try to do a lot with humor, like trying to making fun of that situation or the person in that situation. And I also work a lot with questions, so that sometimes when you experience a situation that is not okay for you, that you can ask it in a nice way, but did you just say that? Or did I just understand that you mean this and that? And this is, you don't have to be offensive, you don't even have to raise your voice, but sometimes asking this question can be very powerful to irritate a situation and to make a new power situation at the moment also.
Yeah, that's also a tactic that I use. Say something like, you don't expect me to dignify that, right? And look at them like they're crazy, because you're acting crazy right now to me. So, exactly. Yeah. And just stare, just look. You expect me to answer that? And then they become very uncomfortable. Oh, I was just kidding. Yeah, yeah.
And it's also a training, I think. The more often you do it, the more natural it comes. So I once had a situation where I threw out a colleague out of a meeting room. So I stand up and said, you're going to leave this room now. And afterwards I was like, did I just do it? I think I had kind of it was a hormone reaction or something. But I was like, it felt good. It was the right thing. I felt good. It was good. But I think, especially females, we have to train it, because somehow we are still raised to be like polite, not laughing too loud. I mean, it's all getting better, but still, feels good.
That's pretty tough. I don't know if I have any example. Oh, no, that's not true. There was a boss. We were on a road show, and he asked me the question, do you know the best way to improve your health? And something about bacterial diversity. And then he leaned forward and said, kissing. This was gross. And I said, I'm from Detroit. If you lean closer, I will slap your face. And then his eyes were huge. So yeah, I guess I have kind of been assaulted in a way. But those things, and it's strange how that just bubbled up right now. That was an assault. That was my boss doing something sexual at a place where he invited me for us to have a strategic discussion. So in fact, these things do happen. But I think it's standing your ground is really important. I don't know if kicking people out, that's really some power you have there.
I mean, it was a colleague, so I thought so we were on the same level, so I thought I'd give it a try, and I think it was good. Because he was very hard on some of my employees in that situation. And my best friend, somebody I take care of, was harmed, to my understanding, and then I was like...
I think this is, you chatted with a lot of kind of joy and humor, but this is very hard. And I think we also heard the story yesterday about somebody walking up the stage and getting a nasty comment, and then in the end not commenting on it, but then afterwards people make jokes about that there was no comment. So maybe it's a difficult question, but how do you develop such a skill that you know in the moment, because I think often you feel it's not okay, but it's very hard to then actually do something about it. And I think we were talking yesterday as well, everybody knows in hindsight, I should have said this, or I felt very uncomfortable here. But do you have any tips or suggestions how we kind of develop this kind of standing up for yourself in either a humorous way or a fun way. And I completely resonate in what you say, like, don't hold the grudge, because I think that is then, at least personally, I feel like I can be mad at this person then for the rest of my life, you know? So I think it's very powerful to then just continue working and make your point and move on. But I think it's not easy.
Yeah, and maybe what are the limits to also take legal action, you know, because you say, okay, if I denounce this, then I'm going to lose the job here, and then in 10 other working places. So I don't know, probably you didn't face it because probably you would have mentioned, but maybe some colleagues of you like had to stay quiet because, you know, if I tell the boss that he was kissing or somebody was kissing me, then I'm going to lose my job, you know, like in the next future. So, I mean, what's the limit of harassment and a bad joke in a way?
Yeah, that's maybe something. So first of all, I want to say that for each, now I'm telling you, now I'm so strong, there are 10 other situations where I didn't do it, where I should have done it. So I think this never goes away. You will still have situations where you afterwards was like, seriously? So I still have that. So, but I think you can train and do it more often. No, I forgot it. That's the word. Yeah. I wanted to say, what was, we were talking training. I wanted, that is, I mean, now what you're asking is you're already at the, let's say, at the end of something. Because at the beginning is, how could a culture form or how could a system form that tolerates such a behavior? And this is also something we can all ask ourselves. It starts with microaggressions, with super small things. As you said, a stupid joke, a comment on something, on clothing or whatever, super small. And I think we all had that you think, was that okay or not okay, and something. And I think, and of course, if you are already at the end and you are really harassed, it's for you in this situation, you cannot do anything anymore. But I think before, we all can help to create environments where this behavior is just not acceptable. And it starts with small things. And I have the feeling if such things like microaggressions are tolerated, it's moving on. Next time it's worse, and then it's worse. It doesn't happen out of the blue, I think.
I have my own consultancy. So I can't say, you know, if there's some management misbehaving, it's me. So I can't complain about where I am right now.
Can I maybe, connected to what you just said, ask a question? Because I was wondering, I mean, you're in high positions, and I think this gives you a certain kind of power. But what you just said and your experiences, I was wondering, I mean, there's a certain kind of so-called bro culture, so that, you know, that there are men meeting for a beer, blah, 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 and that you're excluded as a woman and that you're not part of this culture. And I was wondering how to deal with it, how can you overcome it, also from, you know, not from the side of being, for example, their boss or having a high position, but, you know, I mean, there should always be a way up, and sometimes I'm wondering, like, how to deal with this kind of bro culture that's, I mean, especially in your fields, like really, common, because, I mean, there are many men working there.
So maybe one thing is, so I mean, when I started, I learned that there are many male colleagues who are actually fine and they don't even want the bro culture, so they are quite happy if it's a mixed setting and go for dinner or go to a bar. So there are a lot of who appreciate that. That is one thing. And the other thing is, again, partner up. I mean, look for allies and make your own cis culture. For example, I already mentioned that in the preparation call we had. What I think is also a micro thing, but what excludes women often is when you have a small talk, so before the meeting starts, you have like these 5-minute small talk, and in Germany, especially then in southern Germany, it's very often it starts with soccer. Oh, your team won, no, my team lost. It's the soccer thing. It's very natural, they don't even mean it, but that's the small talk. And then you come in and you're like, okay, I mean, I'm okay, so I studied in Dortmund, I like soccer, but it's not my favorite topic. But what I have done, for example, with another female colleague, they were like soccer, and we were starting like really exaggerate, like, I like your handbag. And she was like, yours is nice too. And everybody was looking at us like that. And we were like, that's what you do. It's the stereotype thing. Come on. And then everybody was laughing. And so maybe sometimes the small things, because they don't do this on purpose, but it's, as you said, it's like a closed room. So just trying to break it up sometimes with allies.
Yeah, and they don't. A lot of times they don't do it on purpose. I mean, I'm bringing in some very pointed and bad examples, but that was not like my daily experience. You just have to decouple yourself from certain people. Not all people are going to be bad. If there is a general bro culture, I have definitely developed strategies so that my liver is not damaged when I go out drinking with the guys. But when it gets to a certain level, then they know, okay, I'm not participating in this anymore. And it's not because I'm not trying to be your friend, and I'm not damaging my personal relationships or my body or my family just to make you think I'm cool. And they give you actually a lot more respect as a professional when you do that. So that's what I would say. Join, but keep your boundaries.
More questions, thoughts?
I had to change seats, sorry. I was getting too uncomfortable in the chair. It's more like a comment on what you just said than an actual question, and maybe a very hands-on approach, because one of my friends in the academic field, she actually raised money with the Equal Opportunities Office to do a workshop on academia and activism, and she only invited women working in academia, so in our department, in the field of German studies. And we met for 2 days, and a lot of the things we talked about was how to develop strategies to break up these like bro culture, or like how can we counter these things when we see them in the classroom. And it was like minor things, like what you shared, Julia, saying something in a meeting, and then like 5 minutes later it's repeated by a man, and all of a sudden everyone hears what he said. And one idea we came up with, I mean, there has to be another woman present in the room in order to do that, but that would be like, yeah, well, as Anna said, like 5 minutes ago, that's a very good point. Or like immediately after she shared this vision or like a very clever idea, be like, yeah, that's amazing, Anna. Could you maybe repeat that and elaborate on that a bit, just in order to amplify her voice? So yeah, I just wanted to share that, and that's not really like a question or anything attached to this, but I think since most of us are in academia and most of the universities have equal opportunities offices with money, you don't need a lot of money for a workshop like that. Maybe like 300, 400 euros, and it's usually pretty easy to get these funds.
I think male allies as well. Sometimes, it's hard to advocate for yourself and be, in this example, being taken seriously. You say, if you become defensive sounding and say, hey, I said that, why aren't you listening to me? That's a no-go. But having someone else in the room, male or female, speak up and say, exactly that, I think it's a really good strategy.
And what also I think can help so for this situation, I mean, somebody invited you to this meeting, right? Normally it's the host, or it's maybe even the boss, or somebody who thinks what you have to say is important. And I also now, when there's, for example, there are like high-level people there or something, I address the, let's say, most maybe hierarchical person there, or the person who's leading the whole thing, and I address and I say, I think it's like this and that, because that gives a bit different. I mean, this person sometimes then feels she or he has to react on your comment, and when he or she says like, oh yeah, that's a good one, then suddenly the others are like, yeah, when he thinks it's good, we think it's good. So that sometimes you can use also the hierarchy to address the person on top, so it's not always bad, I think.
Yeah, particularly in corporates, and in German corporates even more so. Yeah, but I mean, that said, with all the really disgusting examples that I gave, banking in the 90s and early 2000s, I think it's gotten a lot better because it's now more regulated. But there's still so far that we have to go. And I think someone was mentioning in the last panel that we have to, to form our own mentorships. And everyone here has their own strength that they can share and give to others. And this kind of collective wisdom is what we need. And the bro culture is nothing more than that. Mm-hmm. We can do the same.
I don't want it.
No, we don't want bro culture. But collective wisdom is the sentence, part of the sentence that I'm talking about, not the bro culture.
So maybe moving back a little bit to our topic where we started with, you both moved away from academia to industry, and I know there are some people in the audience that are either in the process of or thinking about it. So do you have some more concrete suggestions or tips on how to find your way in that relatively new culture? Because it's quite a different setting.
Yeah, I mean, finding the mentors and finding people to speak with in the industries that you're most curious about, particularly women. So I'm open for that. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. And just having those open discussions. What can I expect? And very tactically, like, what exactly did you do? There's always going to be a lot of luck. It just so happened that Credit Suisse had no biotech function at that moment and needed someone to build it up, so there was some luck there. But the most important thing is networking, and particularly with other women. With a goal in mind. I get a lot of emails. Hey, can we have a call? And I'm like, who are you? What do you want from me? How can I help? And it's a lot more. And sometimes I'm just busy. It's just I have dozens of emails to go through. So if there's an exact ask, I am completing my PhD in the fall. I see that you started your career in financial services. I have seen roles from A, B, and C. With my background, do you think it would make sense? Then it's much easier to say, yeah.
No time.
Yeah, there's really no time for generic questions. I mean, yeah.
I think that's a super good. So I don't know what it is exactly, but I think this afternoon you have this session, right? Mentoring your mentor and something. I think that this will maybe be part of it, because I think it's super important that both parties have to design that relationship and have to invest.
Yeah. I think I also want to say all the things you're talking about is also applicable for NGOs, a little bit less because of this values-driven purpose of NGOs, but also for foundations. And I think it's super important when you once come to the leadership position that you are responsible for your HR in the organigram, that then you can really start to apply your own concepts also of gender and diversity justice. And you can be yourself also role model. You can empower also, for instance, at Amnesty Germany, I was empowering also young women and men when they wanted to become parents to do that and to secure that they can come back on their jobs. And I think that is exactly our responsibility, that somebody like us, you and me, that we are exactly being those role models to broaden these concepts of life and life-job balance, and trying to combine being a mother, being a father, and still being a campaigner for Amnesty or working as director of a private foundation.
Sorry, can you pass it? Yeah.
Actually, was a perfect transition with my question. I wanted to ask, because you have really high position with quite a lot of pressure and responsibility, and your family, do you have a tip maybe for work-life balance? What did you do in the past, which maybe with some to look at it, you should not have done, or what you recommend, some tips?
I try not to be more than one overnight away. In fact, my family's on their way to Berlin as we speak. So keeping that core, and an employee who's a good employee will understand that you have to have that work-life balance. Of course, if there's something completely blowing up, if we have a client, we've had situations where there was a CEO change, or there was someone who was being fired from the board, and our phone rings. And you have to say, okay, I'm having dinner, but I'm going to, as soon as I put my daughter to bed, you are number one priority. That happens as well, but making sure that the organization knows that you are a family-oriented person up front is very helpful. So you don't have to come on the defense if they come to you.
What I also think what helps, because I think the moment when you start a family is a very crucial one. I see also when you see the development of female talents, and what I sometimes see is that also in the private environment sometimes the dynamics change as soon as there's a kid. I hope for you this will again be better. I think this is evolving, but sometimes I see that also in the family. So they go to the hospital and they are perfectly equal and both are working and both have their career, and then they come out of it with a baby and suddenly something changes. And this has nothing to do with let's say things like one has the biggest salary or something. So it's just a natural thing that happens, and if everybody's okay with that, it's fine. But sometimes I see that still the female colleagues are in that role, and I'm not so sure if they wouldn't want it another way. But then you have like strange, when he does this Elternzeit, then he will be looked badly at or something. So I think we as a society can also do something there, that it's more normal, that also the division of work is there equal, and that repeats itself. Because I was taking care of my grandma, I went to that was like a BASF network for exchange for people who are taking care of parents or grandparents. And again, also in this was an informal just meeting. Again, only women there. So that's the next thing. So and sometimes even there were women taking care of their in-laws. So this is so normal, at least in our society. And I was like, okay, this maybe could also change, because then there's less pressure on the female part to do it all. Because I think also the companies have to do their part, and I think they do. So as I mentioned, for example, like shared roles and part-time solutions, and we have a lot of leadership positions now with part-time. So I think we have to do that. But the private part has to support that as well, I think.
I don't know, just a comment on that. I also work in industry, right? And I think that's super important what you just said, work-life balance. It's just so hard. And what I would like to see more from my leadership, I have to say, is they're recognizing that family is also chosen family. Because I think my work, I work for Elsevier Foundation, we do really well in terms of, family care. When you have a kid, you can take your time off. That's all very good, and it's super important. And what I struggle with, like, I don't have kids. I probably don't want kids. And for me to make my management recognize, what are the policies in place? What if I have to go take care of my best friend who is family to me? And I'm very lucky that my direct manager is a wonderful person, and she does understand very well. But as a structural organization at the top level, there is nothing in place, and that is something I really would like to see our industry and really any other place of work recognize better the different structures of what family looks like. Yeah. Just a comment.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in that regard, so I don't have kids myself, but I have got some friends, and what I hear is that women among each other can also be kind of harsh. True. Are you already not picking up your kid? Like, is it already somebody else doing it? So I do believe that there is also something we can do together by being a little bit more supportive, and then definitely the societal image will maybe change.
And maybe also, at least I see it that way. So people are often talking about there's like a break in the CV or something if somebody steps out to take care of a child or does part-time or something. But I think that people when they start a family, they make an enormous personal development. So I think you could also take that into account. And I do this and I see this, that this is also part of a development, right? You change a lot when you get a kid, and you get in some respect a different person, or you develop other things. This has a value as well. I think we should not forget that.
Yeah, I found that actually very impressive, because of course I looked up your CVs and I scrolled your LinkedIn and I saw you just had it there as like maternity leave. I was like, okay, yeah, that's actually very nice to see, and also just acknowledge that the time is there. And
I once joined, and there was like an internal, it was called development center. So it's like for leadership talents that you show in different like role plays, and you have to do a case study and something. And I was pregnant at that time, but not super pregnant, so you didn't see it. And I didn't say it because I think in that setting it wasn't relevant. And afterwards I got this, it was like a mentor, or it was somebody to discuss that with you. And we met then later, and then he could see, and he said, "Oh, were you pregnant at that time?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, you didn't say anything. And it was like, yeah. So, I was thinking about that because I was like, yeah, but what did it change? I mean,
Exactly.
I felt well, but it was, so he meant it super well, this comment, but it showed me that it's still something like special or something.
Yeah.
And
Well, I was in this meeting with this Impregnito meeting, and this board member looked down at my stomach area and said, "That's a really nice bag." And he was talking about my purse. Like, God, you're completely blind. Thank you. Very strange.
That's a very nice. Yeah.
Oh, purse. Okay.
Good.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying, a last question.
I think life-work balance, saying no is very important. Saying no, really. It's important also to balance your energy budget, which you have for different tasks. And it's also internally very important because you are getting more respect from others when you're able to say no.
Yeah, true. And also, I think we have so again, it's stereotype, but I think as females, we have a tendency to take a lot of responsibility, which makes us good leaders, I think, but which has a bit the problem that we sometimes think we always have to save the world now, and it's only me and I can solve, and this is not the case. I mean, so we also can think of, sometimes it's the case, then it's you, I think, but sometimes you can think of, okay, is it really me that has to solve this now, or can we do this so I have a team and I have colleagues, so can we do it else? And sometimes this works well.
Any more last thoughts? I think so. Otherwise, I would like to thank you both very much for your time. I think it was very inspirational, and yeah, I look up to the both of you very much, and it's very nice to have such a heart-to-heart conversation. And let's have lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.